Hi, guys. I hope you're having a good week. This week has been a good week for me because it's the second week back at work. The first week was hard, coming back from a holiday. It's definitely hard to go back to work after, enjoying yourself for 2 weeks. But what I found was this week, I got back my stride, you know, had a few lunches, I had a dinner earlier this week, and I want to cover a few topics. I'm gonna kind of have this show a little bit more relaxed, but I'm gonna cover a few topics. And the key thing is just to go over a few current topics, things that were happening. I want to chat a little bit about Lori Harvey and her new boyfriend, and not about her specifically or the boyfriend specifically, but more about some of the comments that I saw in my comment section and some of the thoughts that I have about it in more on the discussion of what it is that people want from someone like Lori Harvey, how they're looking at her as a role model, all of that stuff. Then I wanted to chat a little bit about, there was a robbery in Houston at a taco shop. It's a little restaurant, and the robber was killed by one of the diners. And I want to cover that. And something I heard when I was listening to one of the programs, like right now, I've been listening widely to different podcasts, on my way back, you know that, and I really came across Daily Wire and Matt Walsh, and I wanted to kind of cover his viewpoint and my viewpoint on that robbery and the fact that that robber was killed. Then next, I want to chat a little bit about a few different items on the manosphere and all of that stuff. Some interesting things are happening. So buckle up, guys. I'm gonna just start through. I'm gonna just go through with Lori Harvey. So let's chat a little bit about you know what's happening this week, right? So first one I wanted to chat about was Lori Harvey and Damson Idris. Now I didn't even know who Damson Idris was. Um, you know, I, I thought I thought he was related to Idris Alba, but then I figured out that his last name is Idris. Idris Alba's first name is Idris. So obviously I didn't know what I was talking about. But anyhow, they're in a relationship. She was in a relationship with Michael B. Jordan, as we knew. And it was one that I think people were hopeful that it would have probably led to something. But you know what? They moved on, and now she's on to this new guy. Now, one thing I did come across in my comment section was from for a lot of women, they tend to not really be impressed by this man, and for the men, they're thinking that Lori Harvey should have settled down a long time ago, and that she is basically passing around, having too many relationships. And one of the things that I said in one of my comment sections is this whole concept of women being chased or having one relationship for years, that has changed over the years. Because I'm in my 40s. Back in the 90s, we had shows like Seinfeld, Friends, Sex in the City, and that I believe that those shows, through their influence, kind of helped to normalize and usher in this serial dating, where people date around until they find the right person. And I think what a lot of men are concerned with is that, potentially she's sleeping with these men. And there's this traditional, thought process that, they want their women to have extremely low body counts, and definitely, some are hoping for a virgin. And the reason why I cannot be a hypocrite is that when I was younger and I was looking for someone, that was I wouldn't say a requirement, but that was something that I really would like. And so I'm not going to be disingenuous. Meeting a woman who you are her first, or maybe just one or two, three people before you, that is somewhat of an ego boost for a man, and I do understand that. And I think a lot of men don't like the fact that she's passed around. But one thing we can confirm is a lot of men do find her attractive. A lot of men do see her as somewhat of an archetype of what they consider to be a beautiful woman. And I think that it's so funny that they would be happy to see her with one man and get married and have children. And I don't think that's a negative thing. But at the same time, I'm not here to judge any woman on her lifestyle, because of the fact that it's her lifestyle. And for me, I don't know these people. And I, you know, and I understand that this guy was once is probably friends with Michael B. Jordan or just acquaintances or all of that stuff. It's Hollywood, it's going on. He's a British actor, by the way, and that. But you know, I to me, as I said to people, I don't know if this would be a long term relationship. I don't necessarily care that much, but I do know that the hope for a lot of men is that these beautiful women, um, you know, would stick to one man. And I don't think it's negative, but I also think that that's not our place. And I'm okay with, either way. Because, the fact of the matter is she's a beautiful woman. And for now, this will be an easy thing for her to go from this guy to another guy or to another guy. Not my preference for that lifestyle, but at the same time, that's not for me to judge on anyone, right? So for me, this relationship, the only significance it has to me is this whole thing about modern women and all of that stuff. And for me, as I said, I, i'm from I'm from the 90s and 2000, early 2000s, and that's when, my time of dating and all that stuff. And I did have those hopes, not requirements, but hopes. And you know what, I'm not going to fault a man for having those hopes himself, because that would be disingenuous of me. But I wish them the best, but I'm not hopeful that they will last long, because as I said in my comment section, there is a dating phase that is now there, and you never know how it will last. And some people even get married and they get divorced. So it's it's not it's nothing to hang your hat on. All right, guys, wanted to talk about this guy, Brian Kohberger. Now, this guy is implicated, and guys, he's innocent until proven guilty. So he is charged with, the murders of some folks in Idaho, and so these young people were murdered there. And one of the things that why I wanted to talk a little bit about him is the fact that there's some stories coming out about him which are concerning, in the sense that it seems that he's a loner and a bit of an antisocial person, and people are coming forward and saying, he was behaving creepy towards women and all of that stuff. One of the things I wanted to chat about this is, we're finding this happen over and over, and I'm going to tell you why it's important. In this world, one of the things that I think I've come across and understood a bit more, there are a lot of guys, it's not about how they look, it's their mindset. And it's also sometimes they're just antisocial. And sometimes it's developmental problems that they actually do have. Because these guys, if they had a different mindset, could get what they want. But they end up being creepy because probably they're just staring a bit too long on these women. Probably they're writing messages. Probably they don't take the hint that someone is not interested in them. And one of the things that happens, I'm finding more and more, is that these guys are being classified very quickly as incels. And one of the things, I'm not sure if they're incels, but what I do know is that there is a streak of misogyny, and I would say definitely somewhat of an entitlement type of mindset. And I don't know if this is the case with this guy, but one of the things is that four young people are dead. There's going to be a trial about it, and a lot of things will come out about this. And um, I'm going to cover a little more on this one because it's important to understand why, what happened, and if is indeed he who did it, why did he do it? Because four young people are now dead, and it's very disturbing to the place. I understand it's Moscow in the Idaho, and it's will be great to find out what actually happened. So something more to cover on this. I wanted to move a little bit about the Black Manosphere and the Self Improvement Brothers. um I know there's a lot of things about Passport Brothers, but I want to talk about the Self Improvement Brothers. There's a lot of guys who are out here who are looking at, you know, going abroad to different countries to find love. And, I'm one of those people who would never discourage someone to travel to get to their dreams and all of that stuff. That's not my place. But what I would say though is that you know, you have to look at the reason why you're traveling. If it is that you're traveling because you're trying to find the type of woman that you can't find at home, you have to look at, what are you leaving behind and what are you gaining? Because uh, you know, I'm I know that in these situations, sometimes, the men are going into these places and they're finding women who are already have children, and they're becoming stepdaddies, and they're definitely taking up a similar woman that in terms of lifestyle and different things than the woman they left behind. And then I think that that's disingenuous, because if you're truly traveling to Brazil, to Colombia, to Venezuela, or wherever, to find someone because you can't find somewhere one where you are, you know, as I said, I have no problem with that. But are you going there because you're getting, someone at a that has a lower standard of living, a lower need for maintenance? And if that's the case, I do understand what they are. As long as men are not engaged in sex tourism and all that stuff, I think that it's I don't know think it's negative. And we all see what happens. You saw that with the Tate brothers. If you go over into these people's country and you break their laws, and you are accused of breaking their laws, then you'll be in serious trouble. And there's something to talk about a man that would leave his own, women and his own country to look for other women, because it's almost like going into a completely new world. And that's something that, I would, I would take pause before I do that. I mean, I'm in a different country than I originally was born, but you know what? I left there with a woman, my wife, from there, because it's our same culture. We eat the same type of food. I'm originally Jamaican. We eat ackee and saltfish. We eat oxtail. We eat curry goat. All of that stuff. So we have a similar culture. We know the different types of things together. I'm just wondering, going to El Salvador, going to Brazil, and that, do you understand these cultures? But you know what? Time will tell, and time will meet out. And as I said, I am not anti any of this, because fact of the matter is, people are looking for love. And as I said in previous shows, if a black woman wants to find love with a white man, an Indian man, a Chinese man, that's not my problem. If a black man wants to find love with the same race, Indian woman, Chinese woman, white woman, that's not my problem. Love is love, and it's a personal choice. My big thing is, when you're going to these new cultures, do you actually understand the culture? And do you understand that you're going somewhere under a different patriarchy and a different system, different laws? And when you do run afoul, if you do run afoul of these laws, if you do run afoul of these customs, what happens? And something to think about. I always say that, be careful in the things that you try to do, because sometimes you jump out of a frying pan right into the fire. So just wanted to talk about that, because as I said, as long as these men are not doing sex tourism and they're actually looking to build strong relationships, that's positive. But even with that intention, you have to understand the laws of where you're going. You have to understand the customs, all those different things, because you can easily run afoul, run amok with all of that stuff. And to be very honest with you, tread carefully. This is not something that is just walking on a beach, talking to people. This is more about understanding the culture, understanding what's the plan, you know there. And as I said, I'm not against it, but it is not without its risks, right? I wanted to talk a little bit about this whole non-select discussion, because I think that this discussion in the manosphere has been happening for years, and I think it's one of the core reasons why I think our society, is lagging. And I did put a chart up, and I was showing people, basically what was the average. The census did something on the income of a lot of folks. And I did something, I saw that Black Americans are the lowest. And let me see if I can find that chart, because maybe if I just show the chart, can I find it? Oh, here it is. Here it is, right here. So I can just show this chart. And in showing this chart, I just want to highlight something. So this is from the Census Bureau 2013 to 2015. And as you can see, they were looking at the medium household income by ethnic group. And you can see Indian Americans at the top, Filipino Americans at, and it goes all the way down, and the bottom is African Americans. And what I was looking at was that Indian Americans almost earn, back then, almost earn 3 times as much as the average African American household. And one of the things, and the nearest person to African Americans back in the census was Hispanic Americans. And they're earning, what's that, 8,000 more. That's roughly about 20, a little over 20% more. So we're finding ourselves, I'm not a Black American, I'm a Black Canadian. But why do we find ourselves, if I found a Canadian chart, it would probably say the same thing. Black Canadians would be on the lower end. Why is it that we find ourselves there? And one of the things I want to talk about is what we consider select and what we consider non-select. And the whole thought of non-select and select was that a select man was someone who was chosen by women, and a non-select was not chosen by women. In the mainstream, I think it's a bit different, in the sense that I think in the mainstream, Hollywood and what Hollywood sells is completely different than what the real world is interested in. Hollywood sells beauty, height, all of that stuff, and I do understand that. I mean, if I'm watching a show and I see attractive people on that show, I am drawn to that show. But in real life, as a man, is our aim, if we're going to join the world of trying to be the best looking, that is where we lose. Because one of the issues that I have with it is, if we're going to be select men to defeat this, because the big thing is that we're at the bottom, right? We're at the bottom. We're earning almost a third of what Indian Americans earn, and this is from the Census Bureau 2013 to 2015. Is our problem that we don't have enough swag or game? And that's the big thing, because swag or game does not get us to earning more money. Swag or game, does not, our aggression does not get us up this ladder. And that's where I think, coming in this space, I see that the men are still focused a lot on swag, game, and who is tough and all of that stuff. And talking about select men, as in who are the tall, handsome men, and these men are tall, handsome men, but that does not build a society. And one of the things that I look at is, this is Hollywood, and great, that's Hollywood. We sit and we watch it and we enjoy it, and we watch it on streaming or whatever. But the true thing that I look at is, can we build cities like this? Can we build cities that can provide employment, can provide security, can provide safety? We cannot build it unless, as men, we focus on the important things. And the important things in this is Germany. The important things in this country is that the men have skills. The men follow the laws. The men believe and buy into. Andrew Tate calls it the matrix. He calls it the matrix. But that matrix, or whatever they want to call it, the order or whatever, provides these orderly societies that we can excel. We can build big companies. We can provide employment. We can have massive farms. We can do a lot. That's select men to me. And I'm going to make sure that I push this. Select men actually are not selected by women. Select men are the ones that build great societies. And they build the organizations and the corporations that can employ people and make them rich. And that's the problem that I think that a lot of people face. They're looking at who is, the wrong things. They're focusing on, who it is that has this natural ability, game, swag, or whatever with women. But they're not looking at building up these skills. And, one thing I'll always say is, when I look at a beautiful city like this, I think this is Frankfurt in Germany. This required a lot of engineering, required a lot of, built upon thought, built upon processes. These guys over years, carved out of the wilderness these fantastic cities. My hope is one day that we start to focus a little more on doing things like this, and not, falling into this nonsense about select men being attractive to women, because I think that is where I find that this manosphere well, the folks that practice that nonsense, they're continuing to keep themselves at the bottom of this ladder, and they'll continually be at the bottom of this ladder. And that's the thing that I find is that they're not looking at improving themselves. What they're looking at doing is continuing the same thing over and over that has caused us to fail. And that is to focus on swag and game and all that stuff, when, that's not helping us as a people. I'd love for one day, maybe 30 years, 40 years from now, that, African Americans move to the middle or even the top of this chart. But it's not going to happen if the focus is still on nonsense like swagger game. So I just wanted to cover that one, right? So moving along, I wanted to chat a little bit about, Bitcoin. I was very surprised. I don't trust Bitcoin. I have no love for something like this because I don't see the basis of its value. This thing is up 21%. And one of the things is I'm going to look at this. I'd never invest $1 in something like this. And guys, I'm not an investment advisor, but I can tell you I would never put a cent in any of this stuff because to me, there's no one can explain to me what the fair value is. But this stuff is just gamified. And right now, this stuff in the last 5 days is up 21%. So this is definitely something that I'll be watching to see it rise and fall and rise, because I'm learning more and more that all of this stuff is becoming like a video game. Things have no basis in value. They just rise or they just fall. So, you know, those who are on the ride enjoy the ride. Those who are outside enjoy the view. But as I said, for me, I'm not an investment advisor, but I personally would never put a cent into something like this. Next thing is I wanted to chat a little bit about the um the taco shop issue. So a few weeks ago, this man went into a taco shop. He's in the black, and he went in there and he was robbing the place. You can see the people have their hands up and all that stuff. And so he's in there pointing guns at people, and it seemed like it was late at night, and he was in there, taking off money off the people, robbing the store, all of that stuff. What ended up happening was, as he passed this man had his own gun. It's Houston, Texas, by the way. So, Texas, I would expect that people, you would have someone in the crowd or someone in the restaurant with a gun. And so when his back was turned, the man shot him. And apparently the man shot him 9 times. And one of the things is the grand jury is looking at, should this man be charged, with killing the robber, not because of the first, second, third shot, maybe the ninth or the eighth shot. And I was listening to Matt Walsh. He's from Daily Wire, and he was very strongly in support of the customer who shot this robber. And I do listen to people. I do understand the different points of views. One things I can see and I can sense from this is people are tired of criminals. And I don't believe that people should be vigilantes. That's definitely, I don't agree with that. But I can see that people are getting fatigued with criminals, and going into a taco shop in the late in the night to rob it will not get people many fans. And right now, this customer who shot the man 9 times, stands a very, I think, a chance of just being exonerated from this. And for me, my personal view is I don't like this type of violent crime. I think that this is just destructive to any society, any community. If you're going to sit and have, dinner or lunch somewhere, you want to do that in peace. And when someone comes in there with a gun and all of that stuff, that's definitely where you know that a positive society does not support things like that. And so I'm not one of those people that believes in vigilante justice, all of that stuff. I am just one of those that believe that you can see that a lot of folks are tired of violent criminals. They're extremely tired of them. And I think that that is one of the big issues that we as a community has to face, because the robber himself, Eric Eugene Washington, he's from our community. He's a black man. And we're going to have to think in our minds, as we go forward, as I chat about all those different things, is that we need to start thinking, how our families can produce more productive men, how our families can produce people that can build and uphold a society. Because, I dream of the day that, one day we carve out something like this in the middle of Africa, the middle of Jamaica, where I'm originally from, all of that stuff. And that comes through us as a people actually doing something positive. And I find more and more as I get older, and I'm not an old man, but as I get older, I'm in my mid 40s, that I keep hearing the same stories over and over. And that story is that, it keeps coming back in different forms. And the story is, what it means to be a black man. And a lot of times it's romanticized being someone who is a loser. It's romanticized being someone who is a victim. Those things are romanticized. I'm happy a lot of women are rejecting that. Because right now I believe that a lot of us as black men need to wake up, and we need to wake up from this victimhood. You know, I- Anytime you see a black man and a white man have a debate, the white man will win easily, because the black man, once the white man gets at what, look at the state of your community, the black man invariably many times jumps into victimhood. And because we jump into victimhood, then it's no longer two men having a discussion. Now it's a victim complaining about the women, complaining about the system, complaining about racism, complaining about everything. And that's one of the things that robs us from growing. Because sometimes you got to look at the mess that you created, and you got to get the energy to fix that mess. And one of the things is, we all, if you live in a city or near to a city, look at the skyline, look at the expressways and all those things, the bridges, all of that. The people who built all of that, they were disciplined, they learned things, they had skills, and that's important for us. And that's one of the things that I want to teach my children, that we have to build, we have to become builders, we have to be positive contributors. I don't want to teach them about swag and style and game and all that stuff, because that can't help them. The most important thing, I think, for us, if we want to rise above our current station, is that we have to look at these folks, the other folks, we have to look at them honestly and see what they're doing. I'm very privileged to work with a wide array of people, and interact with them. And one of the things I notice is a lot of people who come like to Canada as immigrants, from many of these countries, India, Philippines, Taiwan, Taiwan, Sri Lanka. I haven't met a lot of Japanese folks or Malaysian, but I met a lot of Indians, Filipinos, Chinese. I met a lot of Sri Lankans, a lot of white people. Um, Korean, yeah, yeah, I did. I've met quite a few Korean, mainly Korean women. And what I do notice about them is that they have a strong belief in education, and they have very strong, intact families. And a lot of them, you meet them, they're just working regular middle management jobs, earning maybe 80, 90,000 a year. That's what they're doing. But guess what? They get married to each other, and two people who are earning 80, 90,000 a year, that's $170,000 income. They buy a nice house, they invest in their children, and then, their next generation of children do better than them, and they keep improving, they keep doing well. What I find with our children, and I see it with my own children, that I have to focus on them, that we don't teach our children the value of money. A lot of us don't do it. Our children are there, and we buy them the PlayStation, the Xbox. With my son, we got him, an iPad, but he's on, I think it's Apple Arcade, all of that stuff, and they play and they enjoy themselves. What they don't know is that you're going to have to work hard to maintain this, pay the mortgage, pay the rent, pay the bills, all of that stuff. And so by the time they get to 18, they're going to have to think about, how do I further my studies? Do I get a skill? Do I move on to university? All of that stuff. And we have to help them. We have to guide them. If you don't have a lot of money, they have to get student loans, all that stuff. And you have to help them along the way. And with these house prices, rental prices, my kids are teenagers, but I know that it's going to be difficult for them to actually get a house, in the next, I estimated that by 25, 26, they probably will be able to to be rent in the renter market, but that's a lot of years. And I have to help them both prepare for it, but we'll have to help them in terms of providing them shelter until that time comes. And it's very difficult. And one of the things is that I always wonder, because it's my wife and I, two incomes, we're supporting two children, we're trying to help them to make it in this world. I often wonder if it's just a single mother, a single father doing this, that's very difficult. Even having enough time to spend with the children, all of that stuff, that's difficult. And so, right, from the start, you can see why, you know, us as black folks, because we don't get married a lot, we do not provide the household that sets up our children for success. We just don't. And so, you rarely find Indian Americans who are not married. You rarely find Filipino Americans, Taiwanese Americans, Sri Lankans. You rarely find them not married. And so they have these teams. And the thing is that marriages provides further linkages into the society. Because what happens is, when you're married, you have your father-in-law, your mother-in-law, and that, and if they're married, they have a bigger network. So any culture that has a lot of marriages has a massive network. When you're not married, you do not your families don't are not joined. And that's the thing that I think that we forget. Marriage is not just not joining two folks. Marriage is also joining families. And what we find with these other folks is that they have large networks, and these large networks help them in many different ways. Sometimes it's just a room in a house to help them when they're tiding over and don't have a job. Sometimes it's business ventures that they get into. But what I do find is one of the biggest issues, and this is not just African Americans, it's also for Jamaican Canadians, or different different folks, is that we we sometimes scoff at the very institutions that help to build society. And one of the big ones we scoff at is marriage. And if you listen in this space, you'll hear both men and women, say negative things about marriage. Marriage is difficult. Marriage is not easy. I mean, two people having to share a space, two people having to know when to, each need to know when they need to yield just to keep the relationship going is difficult. It's very, very difficult. It takes time. I mean, I've been married for 18 years, and if I told you that being married is a dream, well, to some extent, it is a dream for me because I like the fact that I have someone to share my life with, someone to grow with, and all of that stuff. But it's not easy in the sense that sometimes we do have arguments. Sometimes we do disagree about different things. But how do you manage it? How do you manage those things? And that's going to be the difficult thing. And that's the big thing about marriage, is that marriages are not a panacea, but without marriages, your society breaks down, your community breaks down, because marriage is not just between a man and a woman. A marriage joins two families. And the more marriages in a family is the larger the family. That's why sometimes some weddings have, like my wedding had about 250 people. And that's because my parents are married, my wife's parents are married, and my father has several brothers and sisters. My mother has that, and they all not every one of them are married, but a lot of them are married. So when we had that marriage, it was a whole bunch of people. And I can tell you, when we got our gifts, which was, we had I think we had an account at in Jamaica called a building society, and they gave money towards it. And we were surprised how much we got for that wedding, because you know just getting married, having this extended family, meant that we were able to get a substantial gift to start to think about buying a house, all of that stuff. And that's one of the things I can say to people, that I will never discount marriage, because I do understand how it helps us as a people grow. And one of the things is, once we discount it and we stay in our hubris and we say, it doesn't make sense to get married. It's nonsense. All that marriage is just a piece of paper. The woman is going to divorce, grape you, all that stuff. But what we are failing to see is the the communities that practice this are doing far better than us, and that's something that we're going to have to come to reality with. We have to. When I'm in this space, I notice how many adult teenagers they are. People in their 40s, 50s, 30s, but they're behaving like teenagers. They're not understanding that, two Indian Americans who get married, they're not having like the easiest marriage in the world, but they're staying together because they know apart they're not as strong as they're together. Plus, their community has very strong, opinions against them, divorce and all that stuff. But these communities thrive in Canada, thrive in the US, all of that stuff, and they do very well. And I hope that we can see that, and I hope we see it, that these type of things happen, and that's because they're able to sacrifice. Sometimes being in a marriage with someone is sacrificing, and they're willing to sacrifice and add together. And when I look at Indian Americans back in 2013, 2015, earning 100,000 a year, that's not a lot. That's just two people earning $50,000 a year. That's all it is. And maybe it's one person earning 60, another person earning 40. But that's as an average, well, as a median, meaning more than 50% of the people earn that. That's significant. But look at African Americans. It's all household income. Probably a large part of this is, if you have if you have one income households, how does those single income households compare to double income households? And this is why, you know, earning 35,000 a month is what we call in Jamaica living hand to mouth. You cannot progress. You cannot move forward. And that's why I will constantly say this, that if we're going to be a serious society that we want to move forward, we have to have stable relationships. We have to take care of our children. We have to work together to partner to get them, into the things that they need to get into. Because one of the things is, if you want your child to be even a technician, an auto technician, and all that stuff, you know, growing your child into a depressed urban area, it's very difficult to do that. Extremely difficult, because there's too much big homies around there trying to tell the child to go do something illegal. And sometimes they're attacking our children when they're coming home, all that stuff. So the first thing is, you have to leave those bad areas. And to leave those bad areas, you have to earn enough to leave those bad areas. So it's like a catch 22. And that's why, for me, I'll say this every day, that one thing I have as a black person is that when I talk to other black people, they're willing to stay in their ignorance. They're willing to stay in defiance of, conventional beliefs, all that stuff that work for everyone else. They're willing to do that. And they're willing to do that because they're saying, that's not for me. But are we happy with being at the bottom of society? And that's a question we have to understand. I've chosen that I won't be. I will not be there. I will continue to work with my wife, 18 years going now, and we'll continue to work together to raise two children, pay off the house, do all of that stuff. And because that's what will help our children have a springboard. And that's what we're going to invest. And yes, we won't get along all the time, but what we will do, and we will try to focus on together, is furthering ourselves, becoming better. One day I hope to leave assets for my children, all of that. And that type of mindset is something that I hope a lot more people will adopt. And there are a whole bunch of people. I I have a lot of friends, and I cannot think of one friend who doesn't have that mindset. But when I come online, it does seem that there are people with very selfish views. And those selfish views, I do believe, are keeping them back. But, one thing, as I said, guys, I'll continue to speak about these things because, where I come from originally, they say those who know better do better. And I will continue to always champion these things. People can call me purple pill, simp, whatever it is. But what I do know is, even if it's one person, lift yourself out from at the bottom here. Because, you know, if you understand medians, over 50% of African Americans back then earn less than 35,000 a year. My advice to anyone is try not to be in that bottom 50%. That bottom 50%, if you check it out, is perennially single, in and out of prison, in low wage jobs because they don't have the skills. And that's where none of us want to be. And so I will leave it at that, guys. You know, keep striving, keep doing what you need to do. And I'll keep saying what I need to say always, is that, you know, we can make it to the top. But one thing we'll have to do, we'll have to figure out that, look at the guys who are doing better than us. See what it is. It's easy. You know, they're married, they have strong family structures, all of that stuff. They believe in progress. They believe in the rule of law. Sometimes they don't agree with laws, but they follow it because they know what's the negative of not following it. And once we start to do that, and we will emerge as stronger individuals. And stronger individuals lead to stronger families. Stronger families lead to better communities. Better communities lead to stronger nations. And if we start thinking like that, we'll do it. We'll make it. And I'll leave you guys with that. It's been a longer show and probably I'm just talking to myself, but this is I think this is what's important to say. You know, started with Lori Harvey, but then we ended with, you know, we need to buckle up and we need to focus on improving ourselves, improving our family. And that cannot be sacrificed. You know, as I said, I don't want to be in this bottom half of people earning. I don't want to be the lowest earners in the bottom half of the lowest earners. I don't want to do that. You know, I'd prefer to be in the top half of the lowest earners. So guys, I'll leave you with that. It's always been nice chatting with you guys. As I said, it was a very good week. I really enjoy it. Oh, 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 hi Atlantic Creole. Yeah, very interesting statistics. It's from 2013 to 2015. Hopefully we'll get something more recent, but it is truly interesting because, um, from my point of view, definitely think as a people we can do better. We can do better. And one of the things I want to say is I don't want anyone to think that, you know, I'm a doomer. I do believe that we can do better. I honestly do. Um, yeah, 2021 it's up, but everything is up. I mean, so 2021, yeah, so 2021 is up. This is from 2015. But what if that's the average income for Black Americans, 48,000? What's the average income for Indian Americans right now? Let me Okay. Okay. So 57. But the numbers look the similar, right? They do look similar. They do look similar in terms of order. Is there anything changed? Like, because for Indian Americans, are they still 100,000? And I'm gonna just look at another screen for this. Oh, 77,000 for whites. Okay. Everyone is climbing. Everyone is climbing because of inflation, right? Because inflation is a hell of a thing, right? I posted a link. If you want to come up, you can come up and we can chat. But yeah, everyone is doing a little better, and that's going to happen. That's definitely going to happen, because, you know, inflation, all of that stuff between 2015 and now, you know, average inflation of 3%. That's a lot, you know. Well, yeah, mixed race folks. Yeah, no, it wouldn't. I mean, I know you're from the I don't want to call it exotic sphere because for men I think it's just mixed race. So yeah, for mixed race people it would be different. I know that because um it yeah, it's mixed race people normally would come from white, black, or they'll come from one of these higher earning, yeah, they'll come from these higher earning groups, and definitely they would be, earning, because just imagine if you are mixed between Indian and black, then your average income would likely form somewhere in there. And so for me, I just believe right now that definitely for us as people, that we find ourselves at the bottom. And yeah, we'll grow by inflation, but one of the things is we have to come to the realization that there are good practices that are happening in these other communities, and we can't discount it. These good practices that happen in these other good communities, you just have to write them down. Like, people can just get a little notepad and you can just draw a line in the center of it and say, okay, what is it that Indian Americans are doing? Because right now, here's my thought, right? um White Americans are 59,000 back then. you know Indian Americans are 100,000. I mean, if I was a white American, I'd be like, whoa, these guys are almost double what I'm earning. And when you look at it, what does that mean? That means that, you know, and I know a lot of people may say, let's focus on white Americans and emulate them and get to where they need to get to. For me, I'm different. I always look at what the top is doing, because one of the things is I've learned, and it's quite interesting. If you go to India, India has one of the lowest per capita incomes across the world, very low per capita income. But when Indian Americans come to the US or Canada, they do fantastic. I mean, I in the stat in Canada, they do extremely well. Chinese Canadians do very well also. And I think one of the big things that caused them to do that well is the structure, the family structure, all of that. Because when you have the family structure, it really does help you to get your children in the right position, and that's a staple. That is a staple. I find that the Indian Canadians that I interact with, and some of them are neighbors, some of them are friends. They are very focused on, you know, I can think of one friend now. You know, two kids. They just came back from holidays in Australia, in Sydney, Australia. Hey, Atlantic, can you hear me? I think I can hear something.
Oh, I didn't know I was on. I'm sorry.
Oh, all right, good. Hey, how you doing?
Hey, how are you? How are you doing tonight?
In the making. It's a long time I've wanted to chat with you.
Likewise, I haven't been able to catch any in your streams and get on the live stream with you, but let me turn my phone off. I was, motivated to hop on because a lot of times when we're looking at this data, we're looking at a lot of older data. And then when it comes down to mixed race or even black people, they put everybody in the same group. And to say that, the black wealth is X, and you're counting people who are, may have a white parent and may be able to pull wealth from that parent or from that side of the family, that does skew the numbers. It also skews the numbers if you have a lot of people who come from refugee backgrounds. We have a lot of refugees that immigrated to the United States over the last 30 years. So that changes the numbers. I know that there's this myth that, anytime someone comes to America from the Caribbean or from Africa, they're nurses or they're doctors, and a lot of times they are, and a lot of times they aren't. So when we conceptualize Black Americans and we look at the statistics and we look at their wealth, we got to look at all of that, because when people immigrate from Europe to the United States, they're usually the best of the best. There's not many European refugees prior to the Ukraine situation that was coming to the United States that could skew their numbers when it comes down to what's really going on as far as white wealth is concerned.
Yeah, and no, I agree with you. And one of the things, the main thing is because right here in Canada, like Canada's immigration policy is much more aggressive than the US, like seriously aggressive. Canada is looking at about 400,000 people per year for a population that's 35 million. So if you look at that, I always just say multiply Canada by 10. That would be like 4 million people coming a year into the US, right? And one of the things that you do find, yeah, it does skew it, but what I do notice is, and it's something that I myself I'm trying to understand, is that Nigeria will produce, folks that earn. I think the last time I looked at it, over 60,000 a year. When they come to the U.S., and that's sometimes much higher than the average black. And I'm not talking about mixed race yet. Like we can get into mixed race. India will produce people who earn, sometimes as much as double what the average people earn. But India actually is one of the poorest countries in the world. And you are right. The folks who actually get up and leave are sometimes the best and brightest. And when they get here, it's almost like they've been waiting for the opportunity and they rush at that opportunity. And there's sometimes they look at the other people around them like, why are you not hustling? Why are you not, working as hard as I am? But you know what always happens to them, Atlantic? When their kids get older, they start to see that it's the society kind of gets people into a more comfortable zone. And that's difficult for second generation immigrants. But that's what I can tell you from an immigrant standpoint. But as it relates to mixed race, I think they're starting to give more stats on mixed race, but I would expect that mixed race folks would out earn black folks. In Jamaica, that's a no-brainer.
Well, there's a couple of things at play. So if we're going to look at immigrants from, say, India who make it to the United States, the relationship between the United States and India is not the same relationship that it has with some of the countries in West Africa. So when we're looking at who comes to America from these countries, we got to also think how they got here in the first place. Now, as I mentioned earlier about, a lot of nurses and doctors coming from West Africa or Nigeria, we do have a lot of those coming. But we also have a lot of people who are entrepreneurs, a lot of people who may be orderlies, maybe they're not that high up and working in the medical field. There are a lot of different types of people who immigrate here and they work in a variety of different jobs from Western parts of Africa. What they benefit from a lot of times is people from Nigeria, and this is kind of sad, but they can immigrate to the United States and get in the network of other Nigerians or other West Africans and build relationships. And depending on what city they live in, they can really benefit from those relationships and start their own businesses. And a lot of times they'll partner with non-Black. If they're dealing with Americans, they'll partner with someone white to help develop whatever business they have. I've seen this play out multiple times in different states. So like it's really hard to talk about Black wealth when all these different groups can be thrown in the Black category, all willy-nilly. You can say the same thing about the Hispanic community, right? Because a Dominican, technically Hispanic, is not going to have the same experience as a Mexican if they have more African phenotypes. I have a friend, he's from New York also. He's Dominican, but his features, he has far darker skin than I do, coarser hair, but he's still Dominican. He grew up in that community. He speaks Spanish. That is his culture. That's what he is. I'm not going to call him Black. But I do tease him sometimes. I'm like, you do realize in Ohio, you're Black. Like in New York, yeah, you're Dominican, depending on the police officer you're dealing with. But in Ohio, you're going to be put in this category of Black. So all things related to you, all your statistical information, criminal, otherwise, it's all going to be thrown in the Black category and not necessarily viewed through the Hispanic prism. So when we look at like race, ethnicity, and all of those things, and then we're looking at stuff like wealth, if people are being thrown in these categories, the only category that you're not thrown in is the white category. They know how to police their image and their identities. But when all these other ethnic groups can be easily thrown in different categories, what are we to ascertain from this data? If anybody can technically be black, if anybody can technically be called Hispanic, depending on how we want to look at the data today.
Yeah, and I agree. But one of the things I would say though is, especially for us as well, I don't know if you want to call yourself mixed or you want to call yourself black, but what I do see in the black community is, and Jamaicans do it sometimes, because if you go to Miami, Jamaicans, I don't know what this is in New York that well. I mean, I've been there already, but this is way back in the 80s. But I see it in Miami that Jamaicans have their own restaurants, they have their own culture, everything there, and it's almost kept and preserved in Miami. And they do collude, they do work together, all of that. But my question is, let's just forget about immigrant blacks, who I think the last census said they're about 10% of blacks in the US. Is there something that Black Americans need to work on? Native Black Americans are from the native stock, ADUS, I think they call it. Is there something they have to work on to build those interconnected communities? Because I've heard my own brother-in-law talk about the Nigerians in terms of how even in Canada, they work together, associations, same exact things that you're saying. And why is it that I've never heard anyone say that about Black Americans? That they're
Well,
working together.
That's not necessarily true. Of course, there's going to be a lot of, and unfortunately, all right, there's a lot of things at play here. Let's start first with just, if we're looking at Black Americans, let's look in the last 50 years. We can go 100 years in the past, but I don't really see any value in that. If we look in the last 50 years, we're literally talking about us and maybe our parents, right? If we're looking specifically at that, we can see that from the 1970s, there was this mass selling of Black establishments. Like if you look at cities like Detroit, Baltimore, even in New York, a lot of these bigger cities were also having lots of financial issues. And this was something that wasn't just happening in Black America. It was happening all over. Back in the 1970s, which this is the reason why my father left New York City, there was a huge, New York was about to go bankrupt. We couldn't imagine it now because of where New York is today. But in the 1970s, it was looking like it was going towards bankruptcy. So these big cities where a lot of these Black people lived, they got hit the hardest because, you may own a bodega. You may own some cabs. You may own a couple of businesses, but you are very dependent on, number one, consumers, and the very fickleness of the economy when you don't have generational wealth. So in the 1970s, even into the 1980s, there was this mass selling of businesses, property. It was almost like there was this idea of just let's just sell and get some liquid assets. Let's get some cash and then try to turn it into something else. Within my own family, see, on my father's side, it's more white. So they held on to their delis. They've owned delis for decades at this point. They never got rid of their restaurants. On my Black side, on the more Black side, they owned a lot of restaurants within Detroit, Michigan. And in the 70s, just like a lot of other people, they sold. Many people went back to the factory work. But then the factory started to close. So there were so many different things that were happening to Black Americans and their economy that really made things difficult for them these last 50 years. So if we're just looking at the financial side of things were very difficult, specifically for that racial group. Now, if we're looking at today, what I can say is that I'm seeing a lot of millennials and Gen Xers working together better than I would say the generation before them. The generation
And I
before
agree
them, I would say
100%.
much more. And I'm not saying that that's not an issue today. Go ahead.
No, I agree with you, because I think there's more racial fluidity right now, because I do see a lot of, even when I work in a metropolis and you go downtown and you're eating lunch or whatever it is, I see a cross section of people. I rarely now see like a whole bunch of black people going to eat together or whatever. I do see a cross section of people, which is good, which is good. But one thing I worry about though is when I come to these spaces, which I only came to like 2 years ago, I hear too much anti-marriage, anti, building up of families. And you said something, and I jotted it down: generational wealth. It's so difficult to have generational wealth if you don't have intact families. And that's one of the big things that's one of the things I started my channel talking about. I know I deviated a little into celebrity stuff and that. But one of the key things that I want to do through my channel is, speak more about the benefits of understanding generational wealth, but going back to the root, the root of generational wealth, which is, you get a mother and father working together and achieving it. Now, you said 50 years ago, maybe 60, 70 years ago, the father could do it all and the mother stays at home and all that. Because of incomes now, most households just need two people. And it's very difficult to have a single, like one person managing a household. It's extremely difficult. And so because of that, the more anti-marriage we are, is the less we'll ever have any generational wealth. And that's one of the things that I wanted to speak out strongly against, because in this chart, the Indian Americans, the Filipino Americans, Taiwanese, Sri Lankans, as I say, I don't interact with a lot of Japanese Americans, but I interact with a lot of Chinese, Pakistani. They all strongly believe in marriage, strongly. And when I talk to them, I can tell you, because I talk to a lot of the men, the marriages are not happy. I'm not saying that they're happy, but they stick together because of a better and a bigger cause, right?
What I think with American black people, and this is a person who, speaking as a person who, yes, I'm mixed race, but I grew up primarily around people with African ancestry. Now, granted, that ancestry can be anything from 25 to 65, but they had black in them. They had the black experience from their perspective. They categorized themselves under the black umbrella for the most part. So I'm speaking from that. And also, my father was born in 1951. So, like, my dad's perspective is old school, and that perspective is a perspective that I share. I agree. There are lots of families that are pretty much broken. But I will say this: as a person who's also a social worker, I do assessments on people all day long. A lot of people are coming from broke families. This is cross cultural. Like, I'll ask people, hey, what's your mom's name? What's your dad's name? Well, I know my mom's name, and I don't know who my dad is. And that's usually the story for a lot of people who grow up in these bigger cities. Now, middle America is a little different, but in these bigger cities, there's a lot of single parents, and it's cross cultural. And that's unfortunately an issue. You look at marriage rates of anybody, it's going down. Even when you look at, say, the white and Koreans on this little chart you have right here, Koreans, they're probably talking about South Koreans. They have very American-ish culture. They have a very westernized approach to things. So I'm not surprised that, their marriage rates are comparable to white Americans.
Yeah. And one thing what I wanted to say about that is, um as a black Canadian, it's easy for me to just focus on African Americans. But if I was a white American, I am in the middle of the pack, right? And it's one thing. There was a time in this space, in the black space, jumped into the Moynihan report, all of that stuff. When they did the Moynihan report, I think the illegitimacy rate was 25% in Black America, and they're saying this is a crisis. White America has passed 25% long time ago, and so it's not. I'm not saying that this is unique to blacks, because one of the things I wanted to say before was, I'm not saying that somehow black people have a special affliction that's there. What I am saying though is, you know when you look at Indian Americans, Filipino Americans, Taiwanese Americans, there must be something that's happening there that I just want to humbly look at it and say, how can I replicate it to get there? If you get what I'm saying.
I feel like they're more traditional when it comes down to gender roles, how they approach the family unit. And when I say traditional, I don't mean like because Black Americans like the way we structure our family is very similar to how white Americans structure it. It's not very similar to people of West Africa. The way we structure our families is pretty much similar to white people. We may have a different approach, but it's very similar. When you're looking at people who are from the Philippines, people who are from Taiwan, they have more of a traditional approach. And as you mentioned earlier, these marriages aren't like, it's not like everyone's happy and, they're waking up and they love each other every single day. Some of these marriages are very challenging. Some of these people stay married just because that's the
Yes.
culture, just
Yes.
because that's the culture. But I think with Black Americans specifically, they have this attitude of freedom. And it could be from, this idea of, we used to be chained to people and chained to situations. And now we have our autonomy and we can do whatever we want and we can leave anytime we want. True. But if the attitude is always to separate and to not build anything together, then we won't be able to build anything together. The Jewish community, people always come for the Jews. I don't know why. I actually love Jewish people, but I think they're more upset that Jewish people know how to work together very well. And I have a friend, he broke it down to me very well. He said, I have a cousin. I fucking hate my cousin. He's an idiot. But guess what? He's a chiropractor. And if I ever need somebody to get me some help to find another chiropractor, or have him do it, like I'll always have that. Like they realize that you don't necessarily have to get along for you to work together. And I think that that element is missing in the Black American experience. People feel like, well, we have to be friends to get the job done. No, we don't got to be friends. We just need to do the job. that's the thing
No,
that I don't
yeah,
feel like people get.
yeah, and that's the main thing because like I come across people that I can't stand to deal with, but it's the same thing, right? I have a friend who, whenever I need tickets for, a game or something like that, he always has the connections and all that stuff. Now, we do talk, we do have, give gifts to each other. We do, have dinner over each other's house, maybe once a year or that. But, the fact is that those connections help. And one of the things I always look at is the size of a marriage, of a wedding ceremony. Um, if you see a wedding ceremony with 500, 600 people, that's telling you how big that community is. If you see a wedding ceremony with like 10 people or 13 people or 30 people, you can see that that's a very small circle that those people can leverage, our foundation. And so one of the things that I'm very hopeful, though, definitely not necessarily with millennials, but with Generation Z and that, I think the barriers are being broken down. And I think folks are coming to a common way of being with each other. My biggest problem of it, though, is I don't think they're moving towards the Indian Americans. I think it's coming towards being a very average existence. Nothing is wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But where that issue happens over time is other countries, other sets of people who figure out the traditional way is still optimal, they will become the new 1%, the new 10%. And until each of us figure this out, and you're a social worker, so I think you touch on that. Have you ever come across like someone coming from really challenging situations, and you see them doing well in school, you see them really excelling, and in seeing that, is that the average, is that the median?
No, typically what happens, well, typically it varies from person to person. You can have two kids, both of them come from a very abusive environment. You can have one kid who uses school and extracurricular activities as a coping skill, and they excel beautifully because they are so focused on this escape to get away from their family life. And then you may have one kid who's just wayward, who is rebelling because that is their way of coping with their abuse. So it varies from like person to person and situation to situation. I think the hardest thing is I feel like black people are oftentimes expected to kind of get on code, and they really haven't had an opportunity to ever really get on code. Like if you really look at the history of their time in this country, there was never a time where they worked cohesively together, really ever. Even, when they were brought here and worked here, and even after slavery, and even through Jim Crow, even through now, they've always been kind of used as weapons against each other, sometimes unwillingly, sometimes willingly. I mean, we can look at today. You got people like Tommy Sotomayor and Cynthia G. They know they are actively working against black people, but they don't care because they either enjoy whatever financial benefits or psychic benefits of getting attention from people online. I don't feel like they are a minority. I feel like that is an unfortunate part of the black experience. And it's a lot of that going on. And I think that also drags the entire community down a little bit.
Yeah, and there are a lot more players in it, because I've heard so many. Well, right now what I do notice though is because the pandemic is over, those guys are not getting the views and the cash apps that they used to get. So it's becoming more difficult for them. But what I do think is, you know, if I separate both topics, the Sotomayors and the Cynthia G's and all of that stuff, they're supported by a bunch of folks, I think, who are hurt. And those folks who are hurt, they literally want to hear someone say something negative about the other group, because it somehow that makes them, it's almost like a little bit of, ease for the pain that they have, right? And they need to come back every day, because if they don't, every time they wake up, they're still in the same situation that they were the day before. So they need that. And folks who are negative, who are figure that out, they come back to those folks to get cash apps and views and all of that stuff. And that's negative. But bigger than that, though, than all those folks that are doing it, is that there's just this feeling, I think, and it's not just Black Americans, because I'm from Jamaica originally, and in Jamaica, our illegitimacy rate beats every. I think it beats the US by far, right? Um, One of the things that I do notice is there is a lot of unresolved issues, and those unresolved issues are never truly dealt with properly. And one day I'd want to chat with you about it. Is some folks, they are still not come to terms with the conventional, standards of beauty. They're still not come to terms with the conventional stuff of how to behave towards each other. And all of that is, it's almost like an alien people who know they're alien, but don't feel they can assimilate, or some just don't want to assimilate. And I think that rebellion that's happening personally, our personal rebellion, is actually the big problem. Because I honestly believe that a lot of people can do better. A lot of people can do better. They can. I mean, I remember one day, so there was this garbage woman who came by and was taking up the garbage. She was blonde haired. I couldn't see her eyes. I can't tell if she was blind, but she's blonde hair. But you could see she was pretty, and she was she was driving the truck. She took out the garbage. She threw it in the back of the truck, and she was driving down there. And I said to myself, this young lady, um, looks as pretty as anyone you'd see on Instagram and all that stuff, but she has this work ethic to get what she needs to get. She probably thinks the best thing she can do is be a garbage woman. And I actually went and checked it. Those folks earn quite well. They earn, like in Canada, earn about $80,000 a year. And when I looked at it, I said to myself that she is not working within the mold that was set for her. She's working within the mold that she has set for herself, because she could easily, short circuit the system and either find a man, or you know be a waitress, or a server or something, and get probably the same money. I hope that a lot more people get that type of independent thought to break away from the mold, because I do feel that there is a trap that we have put ourselves into to define ourselves as black people. And I think that we almost, when I was growing up, it was keep it real, keeping it real. That was the number one thing people said. You got to keep it real. You got to keep it real. And I never fully understood what they meant. But as I got older, I found out what they meant. They meant that I should play the part of the black person that they envision people to be black, what they envision a black person to be. And I think Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was one of the best examples that showed that Carlton, just behaving mainstream, was derided and laughed at. He was a comedy, while Will, who had the more urban, swag, was the most liked person in the show. But the show never covered the fact that Will was in trouble where he was living and had to go to a mainstream area. And I think that struggle is not fully, it's not fully finished as yet. It's still going on within individual people, that if they go mainstream, they might be more successful. If they stay in the urban, keeping it real, it almost makes it more challenging. What's your thoughts?
I I agree. I agree that. But here's the thing about the Carlton analogy. Carlton wasn't just the joke of black people. He was also the joke of white people, because
True.
Carlton went to a private school, an elite school, and where was it? Not Beverly Hills. One of those like cities that, not even
Bel Air,
cities, town,
Fresh Prince of
Bel
Bel Air.
Air.
Yeah,
Right.
Bel Air.
So extremely exclusive LA County area. So one would imagine he went to a very exclusive white predominantly school, even though now that I reflect on like the school, there was way too many brown people in that school if it were a real school in Bel Air. So let's just put it like that. But I think with Carlton, he wasn't just supposed to be mainstream. I felt like Carlton was supposed to be, I'm going to say something that's going to offend some people, but I'm going to keep it real. Carlton represents that dude who was kind of like a token. Like he there was almost a performative nature to what he was doing. Carlton wasn't just being himself and being, and we get it, it's a television show, but like there was still this performance of, I'm going to be a clown. I'm still being a black clown, but I'm going to be a different black clown. I'm going to be the black clown that entertains white people in a different kind of a way. But he was still prancing and dancing around just like any other minstrel show that you would see. And I've come across kids like that where they would like parade around for like white acceptance. And at the end of the day, they never really truly got it. Like I would get more respect from, the white community, because it's like, look, I'm not gonna kiss your ass. Like you're gonna talk to me just like you talk to everybody else, so we're gonna have a problem. I got more respect in the person breaking their neck trying to like tap dance for whitey, because it's like they already know that that person is already broken. And I've noticed those people never really excel that far in business. I don't see a lot of I don't see a lot of Carltons as the director of anything, because they don't want a clown. They don't want someone who's going to be, parading around and trying to entertain people. They want someone who can be assertive and confident in themselves. I wouldn't describe Carlton as assertive or confident in himself. And I think what Will kind of had that Carlton didn't have, even though Will was from Philly and urban or whatever, Will still knew who he was at a center level, where Carlton did not know who he was, and he was trying to. It felt like he said that he was trying to be himself, like he tried to give that impression that he was being himself, but it still felt like a performance, like he was trying to please. And that's the impression I always got from Carlton. I wasn't really fazed by his whitewashedness. I felt like he was trying to please too many people.
But if you pull away the characters and just go to the actual people, Will Smith and Alfonso Ribeiro, if you look at it, I still think that Will Smith within himself struggles. I still think he struggles. And I think that Alfonso feels better in the other side of on the other side of town. He feels more comfortable on the other side of town. And
Are we
sometimes I
talking within
wonder,
his career or in his personal life?
life, his personal life.
Okay.
I, I just think he feels more comfortable on that side.
I agree. I agree with you. I agree that Will Smith definitely, and that's probably the difference in the character versus the actor, because in real life, Will Smith has to really play the game in Hollywood in a way that Alfonso Rivera doesn't have to, because Alfonso's already established. He's done what he's done. He's going to host a couple of TV shows. He's never going to be like a big actor, but he also doesn't have to try to be a big actor. Will Smith still has to play this game of, I'm a Hollywood actor. I have to, get these big movies. They have to be very successful. They have to make a lot of money. I have to kiss a lot of ass. Like, he has to do a lot of that stuff that Alfonso doesn't have to do. Alfonso just has to go do a quick little cha-cha, host an award show, and he's done. Like, so I agree. And I also think Alfonso is probably happier in his marriage, being a little bit more
Yeah.
low key and not have his kids all over the place acting a mess. Like, I agree that he probably has a quieter, he may not have as much money as Will, but he's a lot happier than Will and has a calmer lifestyle.
I would choose Alfonso Ribeiro's life any day over Will Smith, and even with the money, because one of the things is I think Will Smith struggles. I think he struggles a lot with, as you said, and he has to be main. He has to gain his, keep his core audience, which are Black folks, and I think that he struggles right there because he constantly is doing a lot of these things. Ali, emancipation. I know a lot of people don't like my point of view on emancipation. Not there, I'll talk about that. But I feel that he,
What is your opinion? I didn't watch the movie. I heard they gave him a weird Creole accent, and I was like, you know what, I'm not tuning in. So what was the issue with the movie?
oh, so my thing with the movies, I'm fatigued with slave movies. I'm tired of seeing. I, from Jamaica, I can go back to my ancestral home. I've been there. I used to go there every year, and that's where my great grandparents were freed from. It's a rocky piece of land. I remember when as a child I used to grow pigs there. My grandfather and grandmother built their house there. I have aunts who have who have built houses on the piece of land, and you could see that they got a piece of land that was just filled with limestone and rocks, and they had to dig their way out of it. And I do understand. I do have my connection back to slavery, but I feel that every time they create these movies, and I'm not talking about Roots. Roots was great. They did Roots. I respect that. They did Shaka Zulu, which I thought brought us before Roots. They also did Django. No, well, not Django. The one with Demon, Amistad. They did Amistad. They did quite a few of those movies, and I think that they have covered that subject. What my issue was with Will and making this movie, why make this movie now? Like, what purpose does it serve? You know, as a people, we know that we were enslaved. Like, anyone can find 5 slave movies that you can watch today. Why make the 6th or 7th? And that part I did not understand.
Well, people make movies regarding the Holocaust all the time, and those movies get Oscars and they're celebrated, and the more historically accurate they are, the more revered they are. So the idea of, there's too many slave movies, God forbid, that's not my issue. They can have 100 slave movies a year. My issue is this: if you're going to make said slave movie, it has to be historically accurate. I'm sick of people sanitizing the events of slavery to make things look a little less oppressive. a good example of that would be like the movie Harriet that came out about Harriet. It wasn't about Harriet Tubman. It was a movie with Harriet Tubman's name in it, and it was such a departure from what really transpired with Harriet Tubman and what she had to survive and what she had to experience. Just imagine being a young woman and running away in the middle, like, and helping other people do it multiple times, and being on wanted ads. People were looking to gun her down to be one of the first women to ever officially lead an army into battle in this country. Like, she did some amazing things, and to change it into some weird fake, slave love fantasy shit, like, it was the most offensive, disrespectful thing I've ever seen in my entire life when it comes down to, movies. So I don't care so much about slave movies existing. I care about people lying in these movies and making things appear that Black people had more agency. I understand that in different plantations, they were ran differently, different parts of the South. Certain slaves have different levels of autonomy. Some areas, like I think in like the Carolinas, some of them even had weekends off, and it was different in different places. I get that, but don't tell the story of slavery as being like, well, like, the slave masters, all he'll do is threaten you. That's the most that will happen to you. No, the worst that will happen to you is your teeth will get knocked out. The worst that'll happen to you is your kid will be sold. I mean, like, these are the things that would really happen, and these movies aren't really showing that. As far as this most recent movie with Will Smith, it doesn't look very good, and it
No,
doesn't seem very historically accurate, and
no,
that's a no for me. I don't
no,
like.
yeah, and I think that's why, and people think it's a slap. It has. I don't think it has anything to do with the slap. I think the big thing is, if you're going to make a movie like that, I agree with you. It's almost sacrosanct. You have to make it accurate. You should be able to have someone say, yeah, this really happened, all of that. But yeah, but that didn't happen with that movie. But what I wanted to say though is, going back to Will Smith himself, is a part of me, and this was probably for the last maybe 3 or 4 years, he doesn't look happy. And part of me says, I say this quite a bit, is sometimes I wonder if he ever stops playing a role, and if he is really himself. And that's one of my things with Will Smith. Is he really himself? I feel more comfortable with an Alfonso Ribeiro, that he is himself. He is being himself. He is comfortable in himself. But I think with Will, and I think years from now we'll find out that he was never comfortable with himself. I think one day he'll write a book, but I've never felt that he was comfortable. I don't think that I think sometimes people play roles to the point that they become one of their roles. And that's my concern with him, that he is one of his roles. He's not himself.
I can see that, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if, in about 20 years after he divorces Jada at some point, because those two are going to divorce at some point, maybe when they're a little bit older, maybe he'll be able to be a little bit more open minded with showing the true, Will
Yeah.
Smith. I think because of his past, because to my understanding, Will Smith used to be a crumb bum, he used to be a criminal to a degree. To
Yeah.
my
Because he beat up,
understanding,
yeah, he beat up, if I remember something, he beat up someone and was arrested for it.
well, not even just that, he was so within the celebrity world, there's always, a celebrity who actually sells the drugs. People think it's
Yeah.
usually the hanger-ons. No, there's like, for example, the most recent example of a celebrity that sells drugs was Fetty Wap. He was the drug dealer. Like, when those big award shows would happen, Fetty Wap would be the person you go to get your drugs from. And Will Smith was that guy. So back in the 80s, when he was singing about parents just don't understand, yeah, he was actually making sure everybody had coke, and he was the dope man. So Will Smith used to have a very grimy kind of a relationship with the community, and as he transitioned to a movie star, he's cleaned up that image to the point where it's like, okay, now you're just being Will from Fresh Prince all the time.
Yeah,
Anytime you interview your Will from Fresh Prince, you're turning on that character because that character was charming. We like that character. America liked that character, but that's not who you are, or it shouldn't be who you are all the time.
yeah. And you know, I which was when I was watching the Whitney Houston documentary, I saw that she was playing that role also. Because it seems like the folks from the 80s, you know, those guys, and maybe they'll have to do more on that, but a lot of folks from the 80s seems like they, you know, you said something before, you know, like, you know, being on code and doing that, but it seems like a lot of the guys from the 80s, they were their personalities, their personas were sanitized. And you know, like when I watched, and I suggest that anyone watch like the Whitney Houston documentary. Whitney Houston was from a very grimy background, but in the 80s, she seemed like America's, like the American girl next door. And she herself was saying that that was not me, but that's what she had to play to so she could sell records. And you know, it, as you said, I do feel that Will is playing. I do feel like he's playing the Fresh Prince of Bel Air constantly, and you can see that he, and that him not being genuine and relaxed. I think that that feeds into people not really consuming his content that much, because I think a lot of people want to see him be himself, be comfortable, be himself. And one of my suggestions for him, hopefully one day he'll do it, is stop going in front of the camera for a while and start directing or even producing films. Because I think that, you know, Tom Cruise learned it, that people get fatigued with seeing you all the time. And after a while, you need to step back a little. And I hope that he does that. I really hope he does that. But the bigger thing with him is, and just tying back into our original topic that we were talking about, is I do think that he puts on a mask. And I do think that he plays a role. And I do feel that for myself, I get comfortable being myself. And the way I'm now with you is the same way I'm at work, the same way I'm with my family. And I feel that that comfort level allows me peace, if you get what I'm saying.
And I think Will is a person who he had a lot on his plate, and not to give him an exit and basically say life was hard for Will Smith. He's a big rich celebrity. He's had a very good life, but through the world of the celebrity, he had to number one be a box office smash. Like ever since what was that big movie that he did? Independence Day. Ever
Yeah.
since Independence Day, every movie that he ever did was scrutinized. It needed to make a lot of money. It had to be a big movie. Like Men in Black was a huge movie, but when Wild Wild West was a flop, everyone started getting on his case. You know, I Robot was kind of somewhere in the middle. It's like he had all this pressure of being, you know, a Hollywood superstar and also being a black Hollywood superstar. In my mind, I could only recall five big Hollywood superstars of that generation. That would have been Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Will Smith. There was a couple others who just were, when you hear their name on a film, you knew it was going to be a big film. So he had a lot of pressure that Alfonso would have never had because Alfonso never got to that level of fame. So I understand why Will has to put on that mask. But Whitney's a good analogy where she started off with that mask on and was, you know, bubbly in these interviews. But towards the end of the 80s, towards the 90s, you can see Whitney becoming a little bit more ornery. And a lot of the Whitneyisms that we know today came from like those interviews in the 90s where she was just kind of going off on people because she didn't give a shit anymore. Because at that point, she was like, look, I've already paid my dues. We already know what I do. I sing very well. And that's it. I don't have to pretend like, you know, I need to perform for you every time I do an interview. And that's what people think a lot of times. You're supposed to perform every time you do an interview. Every time you go on a show, you're supposed to put on a performance, even if you're not there to perform. So Whitney's a very interesting analogy because you can see right in the 90s, right where she started to not care about public opinion. And I get it. It's good to not care about public opinion and be yourself. But sometimes that public opinion can be sobering and let you know, hey, you're making some weird moves. Maybe you should try doing things a different way. But I'm going to leave you with that. It was a great talking to you. I'm going to definitely try to reach out to you again and schedule something more official because this was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, thank you too. And I'm going to wrap this up now. And thank you, Atlantic, for coming up. And definitely we'll connect in the future. Thank you. All right, bye, guys.
Absolutely. Good night.